My name is Margaret Steward Bennet-Alder, and I live in Toronto, where I have lived for the last, well, I've lived in the house for the last 50 years. I've been in Toronto since 1952. I've written From Heather to Hill, which I actually have in my lap. That was the first one. And this was the story of my great-grandfather, John Jack of the Hill Stewart, and his 850 descendants. I started as a child of 5. I was interested because Della M. Stewart, who did the first Red Book and the second one as well, came to interview my grandmother, Stewart, who, although she wasn't a Stewart, knew a lot about the Stewarts. And I can remember sitting in the kitchen at 5 years old while she and Grandma talked. And another factor is that in the 1870s, photographs were the thing to have taken of people. And all these descendants of Jack of the Hill and Maria were sent to Belle and Dan, my grandparents. They were the people in Jack of the Hill's house. And I lived in the house from the time I was 7 or 8 after Grandpa died till I was 16 and moved away to school. When we sold the farm, my brother and I, to Liz and Bill McHugh, I was the one that got all the photographs and the photograph albums. So I had beautiful pictures. Well, I have a mechanical ability, and I am interested in genealogy. And another factor, Grandma Stewart, she and I used to do the dishes every night. And she would wash and I would dry. And to keep me on the end of the dish towel, she would tell me all these stories about the Stewarts, which she knew. Even though she wasn't a Stewart, but she was surrounded by them in East Williams Township. Anyway, it sort of was at the back of my mind, this family history and so on. And I got very busy with other things, teaching school and then getting married, and then got involved with an organization called La Leche League, which is an organization of mothers who help other mothers to breastfeed their babies. And things were going well, and suddenly my son David was felled by schizophrenia. We tried hard to stave it off, but we couldn't. And in 1986, it was diagnosed, and he stopped going to university. When he got sick, I had to stop my volunteer work. I had to stop my paid work because I could not concentrate. I was so consumed with his illness. He luckily had learned enough about computers. He studied computer science, that he designed the book From Heather to Hill. And a friend was into genealogical research, and I used to go down and help him, and then he would let me research his material in the afternoon. My main objective was to keep the memories alive that I knew and that I knew others knew, and to gather photographs that others had, and to research the archives. I had a dream of making this family history of my great-grandfather and his descendants. This book is different because the red books that Della M. Stewart did were skeletons. Just so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. From Heather to Hill puts clothes on the skeletons and also brings the people alive, brings them to life. In writing a book, you want it to be clear and readable. And I wasn't a writer. I was a compiler. I could gather the information. Fortunately, I was blessed to have a woman with whom I had worked closely in the Leche League. She had graduated from Wellesley in near Harvard or Yale. Anyways, for girls, which I didn't even know then. That was comparable to Harvard and Yale for boys. But she was a wonderful editor. And we had a 5-year symbiotic relationship in which I would give her several times a week a page of stuff I had written or collected, and she would send it back all marked up in red. I was thrilled. I wanted to be a good writer. And if I am maybe somewhat of a good writer today, it's because of her 5 years of close tutelage and editing. She caught my dream to make this book. How did I do the research? Well, I guess I was in good health and I had time because I had time and I needed to take the time from constantly looking after David. And Noel was around, he was living. And so I spent many, many hours in the archives in Toronto. And then when we would go to London, I would spend hours in the archival place there, because that's where I got all the information about East Williams. It took many, many hours, many, many photocopies. Today it would be so much easier. Today the pictures would be so much better, and the technology would be so much better. So that's what I would do today to improve the book. There are quite a few stories, and I think the best place to really find them is in Trivial Pursuit, that game at the back. I don't know how many people have ever found it, but that does collect all the stories. I remember Kate Milligan, who was Alec M. Stewart's sister. She wanted to go to California. So she sewed her way down. She stopped off and did mending and sewing for people that she knew on the way and got there. Well, there were many, many interesting relatives, but one I do remember was a descendant of Angus, the firstborn, the descendant of not Mariah, but Christian Laidlaw. And this was Helen Stewart Kidd from Regina. And anyway, my husband and I visited her, and I was trying to find out where her grandmother, Christian Laidlaw, was buried. She, about that time, was 90. She knew it was a 3-syllable word, but she couldn't remember. But that whole family, Angus's family, the firstborn, I think, has made one of the most interesting chapters. Christian must have been a brilliant woman. Now, sadly, she died a drunkard, and Angus would not have her in the house, although his wife Sarah would, because she was on her last few days. And Angus formed a temperance union, and it's all in that chapter on him. The most interesting thing is that they had Jack of the Hill's first grandson. Sadly, he died when he was 3. One of his sisters lived in their home. It was up in Bruce County. That lady died in childbirth with the child. So there were 3 dying in the house. I talked to people later who lived there, and they told me about the ghosts. They would hear footsteps at night. Papers would be moved in the morning. Actually, there was a psychic around. They heard about him, I think, on the local radio station in Wingham. He came to the house, and he talked to these ghosts. He said there were 3. And he said, "Why are you here? Why do you want to be here?" And they said, "Well, our time was cut short. We wanted to live much longer than we did." And he chatted away with them, and I said, sort of encouraged them to go on. And that really was the end of the footsteps and the stuff being moved. But the family, the people in that, there were 3 doctors. And I always heard about PD when I was younger. He lived in Saskatoon, had a practice there, made money on mink ranching, bought land in the periphery and made land that sold. I heard about Robert Boyd, and he used to go up in the summer on the coast in the Hudson's Bay area and look after the Inuit or Eskimos. And he arrived one day, and there was an Inuit doing cartwheels because he was there. And why was he doing these cartwheels? Well, because Robert Boyd had cured him of his lameness. He apparently just had to put one leg back in the hip socket, but it was a miracle to them. That chapter is just full of wonderful events and stuff. My biggest learning, and for which I'm eternally grateful to Sarah Lane, was learning how to write. It was a sort of a side effect, but I am so grateful to her because it now permeates my life. Knowing how to write and having confidence in the writing. Of course, I met a lot of relatives and I got to know who's who. Borrowed, I think there are nearly 500 photos in the book. I lost only one, but I found it. It had fallen down between a cushion in the Chesterfield. I felt dreadful that I'd lost it, but I found it and I returned it. The reaction to the book was positive. I have not had one negative whisper. And people who aren't Stewarts have bought it. One woman in particular collects genealogies, so she bought it. I remember Mary Hammond telling me that she got her copy and she started to read it and she looked at the clock And it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Time to go to bed. And I got many letters saying how grateful people are to have it. Well, I think of two incidences, maybe when I was selling it at the reunion, and you know, people hadn't really seen the book, but I brought maybe 100 copies to the first reunion, and they were numbered. And I remember John A. Stewart, he was ordering one, and he looked it over, and he came up to me, he said, "Marnie," it's my nickname because my mother's name was also Margaret, "Marnie, I want 3 more." So that was very nice. Oh, and the other thing is, when I was in Scotland on the Roots tour in about 1993, which my brother and his wife organized, I was too much of a limp rag to do it. Having got the book out, I just wasn't up to organizing a tour, but they were, so that was great. But I found out where the Perthsire Library is, and I don't know whether I dropped off a copy or mailed one later, but I know they got one, and I got a letter back, and it said, "We get many genealogies, but yours is way and above any that we have ever received." So that was a joy. The Stewards of Glen Lyon 2000. It was sort of an update of the Red Book. And it includes all the Stewarts, the Chief Stewarts and the Jack of the Hill Stewarts and the Red Angus Stewarts. Now there is a question and a half. What suggestions would I have for the Steward clan? So many people have died from eating the wrong food. My parents died of heart attacks. My brother almost died of a heart attack, but he got me eating the right way. I probably would be dead now if he hadn't got me. I certainly would have arthritis. I started to get it in 1982 when he said, "You've got to eat fruit, you've got to eat grains, legumes, fruit, vegetables, seeds, and nuts. Not so much animal, sister." And throughout the book, this is what struck me. Dying of a heart attack, dying of a massive stroke, dying of diabetes. It's the food. And I have changed my way of eating. I think we do have to watch what we eat and eliminate as much animal food as we possibly can, and learn how to eat whole foods, plant-based, with no added oil. I have done a 3rd book. In fact, my son and I do it. It's called the Toronto Gardener's Journal and Source Book, and we've been doing it for 23 years. And because because I'm the publisher, I can put in it what I like. I'm not beholden. And so I sneak in this new passion that I have, which is eating plant-based whole foods with no added oil. And at the back of that book, and people can get it online from me, at the back of that book I have some doggerel, of which I will recite the first few lines. "You will find attached what my brain has hatched. It's my device for giving advice, free and unasked for, which may close the door on our seeing each other, which is not what I'd rather. Make no mistake, no need to partake. But being a taker perhaps may delay the sight of your Maker. And if in the end my way to end is not your intent, I'll still be your friend. Well, I enjoyed it, Bob, and thank you for doing it.